I was encountering some people who were much younger than me and looking at their political views and talking to them. And I realized they just came from a very different space than I do about a whole lot of things. That they think communism is good. They have different views about all sorts of things. I thought, okay, well, that's fine. But then I look at something like top podcasts in America. It was Joe Rogan, of course, the Tucker Carlson show, which to me, from what I've heard about it, seems absolutely deranged. And now the Hawk Talk girl. The point is that I feel the world has gone mad.
No,
and I have my friends, I have people I talk to, I have people I read, and I have a community which I feel, reasonable people, we're disagreeing and everything like that. But I feel we're just this thing. And then the broader part of America, half of Americans are going to vote for Trump.
that I kind of get. I mean, when I think about the level of information the average voter has, and just how easy it is to put yourself in, your echo chamber where you view your candidate in a particular way and don't hear these things about them. And, if you want to put yourself in that camp and look at Kamala or Joe Biden and focus on the stuff that puts them in a negative light, that doesn't shock me. Hello, Paul Bloom.
Hello, Robert Wright. How are you doing?
I actually, honestly, the state of the world has me not all that enthusiastic about life right now. But this is not a foreign policy podcast. We don't get too deeply into that, although we're actually going to talk about some things that are relevant to that.
Foreign policy adjacent.
Foreign policy adjacent, Middle East adjacent. But first, we should introduce ourselves. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of the Non-Zero Newsletter. This is the Non-Zero Podcast. And you would be Paul Bloom of one of the Small Potatoes newsletters. Is that the way you put it?
One of the many. Yes, I run a Small Potatoes Substack, and I'm a professor at University of Toronto and Yale University.
There you go.
We're starting off very formal today. I think we're both a little bit just finding our footing.
Well, you said you got very little sleep last night. I got a little over 6 hours, which is good for me lately. So I have no excuse.
So let me give some sleep advice. I've taken CBT courses. You wake up in the middle of the night. You go back to bed.
Cognitive behavioral therapy for the many people out there who have no idea what you're talking about, Paul Bloom.
Cognitive behavioral therapy to get to sleep.
Okay, thank you.
What I did 1:30 in the morning, having a bit of problems getting to sleep. So I go open up my computer. I go turn on HBO and I watch an episode of Industry, this exciting, high energy, high sexual show that's tons and tons of fun, which energizes me and charges me for the next hour and a half. Do not do that. That is advice for what not to do. Do not do that. Do not drink coffee before you go to bed.
Oh, Paul, that's pioneering advice. You should write a book about this. Don't drink coffee. How about like a pound of bittersweet chocolate? Would that be okay, Paul?
I think chocolate's fine.
The deep insights keep coming at this podcast.
I see a post. I just did a post most recently for my podcast, 6 ways I use AI when writing, and it was a paid post. So you read part of it and you have to pay. A lot of people pay for that sort of stuff.
Really?
Yes, when it's advice. Well, I don't know if you give enough advice.
I should give more advice because God knows I know enough about AI.
You do?
I'm writing a book about it. I got a book about it coming out in a year. I should give more advice about it.
You should. Folks,
here's your advice. Fear it. Fear it. And I put the paywall right between fear and it, and I'm rich. So wait, how is this related to cognitive behavioral therapy? Your advice to not drink coffee or watch shows that will leave you in a state of agitation.
It is good
and again,
advice.
Thank you for I want to thank you for the insights. First of all, again, I just want to underscore that. But now, what does that have to do with cognitive behavioral therapy?
It is advice over what not to do. So the thing about cognitive behavioral therapy for sleep is that it is incredibly boring advice that everybody already knows, but you just got to do it. You go to sleep at the same time. You don't drink coffee too late in the day. What is this coffee? Well, yes, it is coffee because I'm tired. But I'm not going to drink it too late in the day. You do sleepy, settling things late at night.
Oh, I do not think you're doing justice to cognitive behavioral therapy.
For sleep, for insomnia.
In general, it sounds like just obvious shit. I knew Aaron Beck, arguably one of the 2 people credited with being the founders of cognitive behavioral therapy. And by the way, he read The Moral Animal and spoke approvingly about it. And I wrote that book, but I digress.
Yeah.
Come on. Yeah, give it its due. Come on, Paul. You're a psychologist.
The techniques for sleep are just basically ways to okay, the more CBT part. So the coffee is kind of obvious. You don't need it to be a psycho. But the idea is you establish routines that don't reinforce bad behavior. So if I get up at 1:30 in the morning and rush and watch a really fun TV program that I enjoy a lot, well, I am in some way an associative being. And I say, and then I wake up at 1:30, I say, there's some fun to do. There's some excitement to do. I'm rewarding myself for not sleeping. In some way, you've got to kind of punish yourself for not sleeping. You just stay there. You'd be bored. You listen to a boring podcast.
In memory of Aaron Beck, I would like to highlight a different aspect of cognitive behavioral therapy that for anxiety in particular, one thing it has you do is, in effect, recognize the irrationality of some of your fears. There's that kind of therapy. And I mention that because, there is this mindfulness-based cognitive behavioral therapy. And I wrote a book about mindfulness and Buddhism and meditation and mentioned that.
If only Aaron Beck had lived to read it.
Well, he could have, but I don't know that he did. I mean, he lived long enough. But anyway, and mindfulness can supplement that. I mean, meditation can help you get more critical distance from your anxieties.
I asked somebody I know who's in the clinical program at Yale, professor in the clinical program at Yale, what's new in the field in the last 20 years? Like if I went to a shrink now as opposed to 20 years ago, what's new? And honestly, and I think this is a disappointing fact, and I wrote a Substack about it, not much. You wouldn't, it wouldn't be that different. But the answer she gave me is mindfulness. Mindfulness meditation is now part and parcel of the sort of standard what they're trained to do.
Really?
Part of natural training. Yeah.
Huh. And probably my book is what made the difference, you think?
Basically, your book is the fundamental text that has transformed clinical psychology. I don't know, but it didn't hurt.
I'm sure she mentioned it. I'm sure she mentioned it.
I'm sure she meant it didn't hurt.
So now back to current events, which we haven't been to yet, but we're going there.
So, Bob, do you think that if Kamala is elected, she will shut down Non-Zero Podcast and throw you in prison? You have been a dissenting voice over the Middle East, over Ukraine.
Elon Musk thinks she will put him in prison. I know
that was
seriously, like somebody tweeted that she would throw him in jail her first day in office, and he quote tweeted and said, "Yup, YUP." And we actually wrote about this a little in the latest issue of the Non-Zero newsletter about touched on the number of billionaires who seem crazy. I mean, there's him, there's Bill Ackman, who, having finally let go of the multiple shooter theory of the Trump assassination attempt, has now moved on to, what was it? It was, I'll track it down.
Stolen debate questions.
Oh, yeah. An actual, explicit conspiracy between ABC and the Kamala Harris team, like contriving to fix the debate. And look, there may be all kinds of biases and all kinds of implicit even coordination, but ABC's smart enough not to actually do formal communication. I mean, he's, and then Peter Thiel, I heard, do this thing on Joe Rogan about, he's got this theory about how Jeffrey Epstein advised Bill Gates to start the Gates Foundation so that he could keep Melinda, his wife, quiet and not give her half of his assets in the event of divorce. It's just no evidence. These people, and the reason it concerns me is because of the amount of power these guys have now.
Yeah.
I mean, thanks to the Citizens United ruling largely, but you've seen these articles in the New York Times, Kamala Harris outraising Trump, and they say she's up ahead by like 200 million or something. Elon Musk alone is reportedly going to give Trump 180 million. Now, not Trump per se, but the super PAC. So these are technically different issues. New York Times thing is about campaign contributions per se. Elon is going to give 180 million reportedly to Trump super PACs, but he could, though obviously, and there are these laws about, well, you can't coordinate between a super PAC and the candidate. Yeah. And ABC News can't be biased in the debate. But of course, in the real world, these things happen. And I don't think there's any limit on what, I mean, seriously, we got a guy who is so crazy. He seems to think he'll be arrested the first day if she wins. So he's kind of motivated to keep her from winning. And our laws allow him to spend more than the total amount being spent by Kamala's campaign plus super PACs on Trump. And he can do that without losing a night's sleep. Okay. And that's where we are. If I sound agitated, it's not a joke. We are headed toward an oligarchy. And these fuckers are crazy. That's the worst part. I could deal with, like, if I were the oligarch, an enlightened oligarch, fine. What's not to like about that, Paul?
You'd be a good oligarch.
I would.
You respect free speech.
But do they ask me? Do they ask me to be the? No, I never. No.
I think the thing about oligarchs is you can't just wait to be asked. I think you got to claw your way up to the top.
I mean, what I'm saying is, why doesn't some billionaire say to me, Bob, you'd be a great oligarch, have all my money? Because they're not enlightened. That's why, because they're not qualified to be oligarchs.
It all ties together.
Yeah.
So your brand, you're many brands, but one of your brands is cognitive empathy, getting in the heads of people and figuring out what they really believe and what they want. You argue that this is essential for dealing with them, dealing with your friends, dealing with your enemies. So let me try this out with regard to Elon Musk. Exercising my own cognitive empathy, I do not think he honestly believes that he will be thrown into prison and have X destroyed if Kamala Harris becomes president. I think that if an election is coming and it looks like she's going to win, he is not going to find himself some island and some to escape from the clutches of the U.S. legal system. In fact, I imagine that if Kamala Harris becomes president, he will then direct a lot of his money to ingratiating himself with her and so on. I think that this is very performative. It is equivalent. It is the equivalent of Trump's many pronouncements saying, if I lose, we are all going to go to the gulags. If I lose, Israel has 2 years before its ultimate destruction. It's performative.
I think it's about 40% performative. He's a troll and so on. But I think he does believe that, he's just bad at handling evidence. It's like, and I think he's a little paranoid. And there is some reason to, look, of course, they don't like you, Elon. You're giving $180 million their opponent. You're right about that. Is there a danger that you will get fewer contracts from the Pentagon and the Harris administration? You better fucking believe it. And that's why if I were you, I would just kind of shut my mouth during the election, but it's up to you. But I do think he thinks it'll go much further than that. If you remember one of his first crazy tweets years ago during the Thai, when those kids were trapped in the cave in Thailand, and some guy who was like helping out there heaped disrespect on the submarine Elon was going to put together to save the day. And Elon called him a pedophile or pedophile or however it's pronounced. And if you looked in the comments, he was he wasn't kidding. And there's, he really defended. You can tell, he's saying, you can tell he doesn't look like a pedo to you. And there was no evidence. It was a crazy projection to make. And, he's kind of deranged. I'm telling you, Bill Ackman, Peter Thiel, and Elon Musk are gravely lacking in judgment about evidence. And it's I think it's partly has to do with a kind of single-mindedness, and in some cases, brilliant single-mindedness. It takes, and remember, Andy Grove, head of Intel, wrote a book called Only the Paranoid Survive. He was only half kidding. If you're going to be the world's richest guy, there's going to be some bodies in your wake, right? Like these guys play hardball. And part of playing hardball is always thinking defensively. What's the next threat?
You're right and you're wrong. You're right in that there's something kind of weird, disruptive, messed up about Musk that leads him to act against his best interests. Because you're right, if he simply wanted his companies to thrive, he would be doing the normal thing, which is he'd be sort of, maybe he'd provide some mild support one side or another, but he wouldn't be calling for we'll get to this, but calling for the Democrats to be assassinated. He wouldn't be saying, "Oh, they're going to throw me in prison." This crazy stuff, and it turns off a lot of people.
He didn't quite call. I mean, we should be fair. What did he tweet?
He observed it or something. Isn't it interesting that nobody
has tried to assassinate Trump? Harris or Waltz, and then he had an emoticon of somebody thinking like, wonder what it means. I guess he could argue that it means, I think he may have meant, it means the deep state is behind these attempts and they don't want to assassinate it. But it's so, but again, talk about either a lack of judgment or a trolling instinct that's so out of control that he is a public menace. I mean, that for him not to think, this is pretty ambiguous. Obviously, people are going to think I'm calling for their assassination.
He, if I remember right, he got a lot of responses, including people saying, and I don't know if this is true, but this sort of talk could get you in trouble regarding contracts with the Pentagon and so on. You're legally allowed to say it, but it could get you in all sorts of. So he took it down, and he said something like, and I found this kind of adorable. He said something like, when sometimes you say something to your people around you and they find it extremely funny, and then you put it to a broader audience and they don't find it funny at all, like puzzled. And well, when I say something to people who I pay to inflate my ego and they laugh at my joke and say, good one. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't go off too well when I send it off to the actual world. There's a certain lack of self-knowledge.
Oh God, did you hear he was on this, I guess All In Summit is where he said this, but he talked about the joke he had recommended to the Saturday Night Live people when he was on it and they vetoed it.
Go ahead.
Let's just say it involved, oblique references to male and female genitalia, and there was going to be a rooster and a cat. And I mean, it's even more juvenile than that sounds. It's even more juvenile than that sounds. I mean, this guy is like, anyway.
Okay.
Great rockets. Great rockets
guy. Great. I think in many ways.
And speaking of genitalia, can I just say, to his credit, they look less like penises than Jeffrey Bezos's rocket. Have you seen Jeffrey Bezos's rockets?
I have.
That's like they're just saying, with their shape, I'm coming after you, Elon. That's all. Sorry.
Okay. Go ahead. And Elon Musk has done things which are plainly against his interests. Sometimes I think it reflects he's somewhat unmoored from reality. Some sense it's just sometimes I think it's drugs, ketamine or whatever he's on, and sometimes it's principle, which you might agree with, or you may not agree with. Like there's this thing where he's been interviewed, and he's not in the best shape, it seems, and he's asked about losing advertisers from Twitter, and he says, "Fuck them if they want to leave."
I think he even says
he picked out one person.
It was the head of Disney, former head of Disney or head of Disney. He even said, "Fuck you." And he used his first name and everyone knew who he was talking about, I think.
And then the advertisers go away and then he tries to sue them for leaving. It seems irrational, like not in one's best interest. So agreed with all of that. But I just want to insist that some of this stuff is performative, and including some of Ackman's stuff. It is designed, just asking questions, just framing worst case scenarios. I do not think that there's even 1% of Musk that believes there's any chance he will be arrested or anything like that. But he knows it incites.
I don't know. I don't think he believes it'll happen the first day of office. But I think he thinks, like some of his followers, I tweeted about this, and some of his followers were probably reflecting the way he thinks about this, where they're like, well, the SEC is already after him. Like next stop jail or something, or this is already happening next up. Well, the SEC is not going to put him in jail. And by the way, he's an extremely irresponsible corporate actor, and that's why the SEC has been after him.
Yeah.
He says, he tweets, I've got funding secured for taking Tesla private. Complete lie. Of course, you're going to get fined for that because it's going to affect the stock price.
Yeah.
But I agree. I mean, first of all, it is somewhat performative, but I think his trollishness is almost as much an instinct as a conscious calculation, and which reflects on the question of how much of this he believes. I also agree some of it is kind of principled, or at least ideology. He's fiercely anti-woke. That's part of his attraction to Trump. Although even that apparently got some degree of energy from the fact that he's got a trans daughter who disowned him after, I guess, after turning trans or something. So, there's some degree of performance. There's some degree of commitment to principle, but the amount of all that, the amount of the ideology that is shaped by personal interest. In fact, another thing you got, or the amount of principle and controversy. Another thing, do you remember when he got in trouble for the anti-Semitism on several occasions?
Yeah.
But one of them, I think, did get back to the advertising because he thought, because some people say he's letting Twitter become a platform for anti-Semites. I think he thought like the Anti-Defamation League and whatever other actors were discouraging advertisers. And so that led him to say things that could sound like they're based on ideological principle and were interpreted as being anti-Semitic, but in any event, actually got back to his money at root. Yeah. And so that was a masterful segue to the Trump anti-Semitism thing.
Oh, anti-Semitism, a bit of money. And in fact, the structural analogies between Musk and Trump run deep. For each as you could ask, what's going on here? Is it derangement? Is it strategy? Is it instinct gone awry? Is it instinct done well? So there's a lot to be said about Trump. I listened to a 2-minute clip, vintage Trump, last night, where he decides to speak to the women, and like the way women, I got something to tell you. I am your protector. And he goes on, he will protect them. He will protect them from crime in the sidewalks. He will protect them from high prices. He will protect them from, I swear to God, he said migrant hordes in the suburbs. But I don't think he said hordes, maybe migrants in the suburbs. He will protect them. He will protect them so much, they will be so happy. They won't even have to think about abortion.
Whoa, I lost you. So they'll be so happy, they won't have to think about abortion.
It's not my non sequitur.
Maybe it means they won't be raped by immigrant hordes.
Maybe it means that just stop worrying about these culture war things and appreciate that Trump is the biggest defender of reproductive rights ever. And so he's doing that. So this is anyway. But what you were alluding to is Trump did talk to the Jews, as he often does. And he always leaves something for one of them. I know you probably forgot about this. He just simply complimented the Jews on their abilities with money. He says, I have a lot of Jewish guys working for me and a lot of Jewish friends, and you guys are really good with money. Kudos, and in some it is a stereotype. Some people would say it's an ugly stereotype. Some people, but
Trump would not say that. I think being good with money is something that he puts on the positive side of the list.
Exactly. But here he was a little bit put off with the Jews. And I think the charitable version of the argument is the Jews have had no better friend as a president than Trump. Israel certainly has had, in fact, he says that he at one point said that he has done more for Israel than anybody ever in the history of the world.
He has been very responsive to the right-wing pro-Israel aspirations. When he was president, I mean, he did a lot of shit that I don't think was actually good for Israel in the long run, but there were people who considered themselves pro-Israel giving him a lot of money and asking for them. Oh, by the way, he was very explicit about how transactional that was. He said, I'll let you get back, but he just recently, this week, I think, he was saying, Miriam Adelson, the widow of Sheldon Adelson, the gambling magnate billionaire guy who gave him a ton of money, he'd say, she'd come into the Oval Office and say, I want this for Israel. And I'd say, hey, I just gave you that last week. And I was joking about how late, hey, I can only give some. He's just like saying, I'm for sale. Our Middle East policy is for sale when I'm president.
Yeah, that sounds right. That sounds right.
Yeah,
and by the way, and in the course of all of this, I see him on Twitter selling coins and stuff like that. It's like little infomercial stuff where he sells these coins. And
they're Trump coins. They're Trump coins.
They're Trump coins.
Not to be confused with the fake Trump coins, as he emphasized. Don't buy the fakes, buy the real Trump coins from him.
At one point, he sold, I think, something involving pieces of the shirt he was wearing when he was shot. Just a very religious notion.
That's smart marketing.
That is smart. That's smart marketing.
Especially since we know that there were actually about 1,000 shirts that he took fabric from and sold by mail as being part of the shirt.
Really?
I would guess. No. Oh, I'm just speculating.
I
want to apologize for that. That was really uncalled for.
He would lack integrity for a man.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to apply that. I'm sorry.
But the part you were alluding to is he is explaining, he believes that the Jews have no bigger friend than Trump. But the Jews don't vote for Trump.
Right.
And this annoys him. So he expressed his annoyance. And he said something to the effect, which I think is unfortunate, to put it nicely, that if Trump does not get elected, the Jews will bear some large part of the blame.
Mm-hmm.
And, I actually don't think Trump is, I don't think in his speech he was trying to make a threat. I don't think he was purposefully raising anti-Semitic tropes about Jews destroying, everything good about a country. I think he was just expressing in his own Trumpian way the sort of pique and resentment and how can you betray me? It'll be your fault if it doesn't work. Don't you feel bad about that?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. How did you take it?
And remind me, Paul, does blame the Jews have any kind of unfortunate historical resonance?
No. The Jews have never been blamed for anything of significance. We've been kind of with a free pass. I think it was just the murder of Christ, other things.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the murder of Christ. You'd probably learned about that a while ago.
So what, one thing what he's doing, among other things here, is, and this is actually what makes it hard to decide whether to call him an anti-Semite in a way. He's conflating Israel and the Jews. He's assuming that all Jews should have first and foremost in their thoughts the welfare of Israel. And there are actually some Jews who don't, and some who resent that, and some who say, like, leave me the fuck alone. And there's an old saying that actually almost no one has said, but some people have said it, and it's true, that there are two kinds of people who conflate Israel and the Jews: anti-Semites and people on the pro-Israel right. Yeah. And, it's kind of true. Like Netanyahu, who I think it's safe to say is on the pro-Israel right. I don't know if you remember, there was some kind of terrorist attack on some kind of anti-Semitism going on in France at some point in the wake of a terrorist attack or something. Bibi went to France and he was talking to a group of Jews, French Jews. And he was I forget what he was saying, but he was talking as if their first allegiance should be to Israel.
Yeah.
And some of them started singing the French national anthem. What is it? La Marseillaise or something? To say, wait a second, we are French citizens, first of all, who are also Jewish. You're here to talk about anti-Semitism, not Israel.
Yeah.
And so, and this has come up recently. I was, in the wake of all this Middle East trouble, because there have been more expressions of anti-Semitism. And, I think there's been probably a rise in anti-Semitism per se, but certainly expressions, right? Like attacks on Jews and people saying things. I think it's safe to say it's correlated with what's been going on in the Middle East and Gaza in particular.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And there's a funny thing. I talked about this with Danny Besner and Derek Davison on this thing I do every 2 months, a collaborative thing with the American Prestige podcast. These are my lefty commie friends. And we were talking about this, and I guess one of them, Derek said, I said, look, let's be honest. I said, I think you're not supposed to say, right, that anything Israel does, like what it's doing in Gaza, could increase the amount of anti-Semitism in the world, or the expression of it, if you want to see it as this thing that's always latent, and the question is how much. However, I think you're not supposed to say those things, because if you do, some people will say you're anti-Semitic for saying them. And Derek said, yeah, because it's a conflation of the logic behind that accusation is conflation of Israel and the Jews. And I said, well, no, wait, let's be clear. If you say that Bibi Netanyahu's policies in Gaza have increased the amount of anti-Semitism, or the expression of it, you are attributing that conflation to the anti-Semites, right? So right. I just want to say, I think you should be allowed to say, I mean, if Bibi Netanyahu is going to go to France and say every Jew should be loyal to Israel first and foremost, or imply that, I think, I don't see how he can turn around and say, but nothing I do could ever be bad for Jews anywhere in the world, because after all, who would conflate Israel? I mean, and the Jews, right? Okay. So that's my sermon for today.
I mean, there's plainly a correlation. I think people legitimately have to appreciate that there are, of course, some Israelis who aren't Jews, and more to the point, there are many American Jews who are anti-Zionists, who don't care about Israel one way or another, or so on. But I think people on every side conflate it, and it's an understandable, non-malicious conflation. It's just a powerful correlation.
I mean, I don't think everyone does. I think anti-Semites do, and people pro-Israel right do. And people may have a tendency to assume these things, but I think some people try to keep them separate. And I want to say, I'm not saying Israel shouldn't do anything that does inflame anti-Semites. Some things you got to do. And I'm not saying even that Bibi is to blame for any rise in anti-Semitic attacks in America that follows policy in Gaza. I'm not talking about blame or anything else. Yeah. I'm just saying I think we should be able to speak clearly about causal connections before we have a discussion about who should have done what. And what
I think I'm agreeing with you. I'm just saying that the conflation, the correlation, isn't left to people on the crazy or evil extremes. I would imagine very moderate Democrats and very moderate Republicans, if there still were any, would say, hey, we really want to shore up the Jewish vote in such and such a place. Let's get somebody to talk about Israel.
Yeah, and sure. And they may say, look, I'll err on the side of caution. There's going to be Jewish people at this. There's going to be Jewish donors. For all I know, they care about Israel. Why not just play it safe and blah, blah, blah. That's all true. But I would also say the conflation is even less valid than it used to be in America, because, famously, opinions are changing among younger Jews. There's a sharper contrast in attitudes between younger and older Jews than there was, 20 years ago.
That's right. But so going back to Trump, do you agree with me that what he said was, first thing, one of his defenders said, "Oh, Trump says that all the time," which is true. There's many clips of Trump saying. Yeah. Do you think anything sinister in it, or was that just Trump being Trump? On a normal, extremely low standards, we judge Trump.
He's gotten a lot of positive reinforcement for saying things that you're not supposed to say generally. Yeah. Right? Like, he speaks in front of his crowd, and he'll say things about, Elizabeth Warren, call her Pocahontas, which I have to admit is one of his, if you had to rank his lines on a spectrum of creativity, it's better. It's better than some, but, I think it's almost like the reflex is generic. It's like, oh, you're not supposed to say this? Okay, here goes. Yeah. It's like, I think he's not a dumb guy. He must know at some level that even, like talking about Jews being good with money or whatever is frowned on. That cannot have escaped his attention, right?
I think one understands Trump really well if you think of him as a comic, as doing a shtick, doing bits, making the crowd laugh. It's not pure comedy. It's somewhere on a blend between comedy and sort of demagoguery. And the stuff about eating the cats and dogs isn't very funny. He does it to rev up. But then when he relaxes, he just goes into some sort of shtick, and all comedians push the boundaries. And so, so he does his whole thing.
He can be funny. He can be funny.
Yeah. People pointed out that we have actually never seen him laugh. He's not.
I know.
But that's okay. I mean, comedians themselves don't often laugh.
But it's weird.
It is.
Well, but comedians do laugh. There are comedians who have straight-faced shticks.
Yes, but they will laugh with other comedians and appreciate it. No, right. Trump is just Trump.
Right.
And I think this is just part of a bit. And yes, it is a bit transgressive to associate Jews with money and so on. So Trump goes there.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess politically he's probably right. I guess it doesn't lose him. I don't know. I mean, it's very weird. Because I don't know if AIPAC explicitly likes him or secretly likes him, but you can bet there's things about him they like. And when he says these things, he does get blowback from kind of institutionalized pro-Israel forces. Doesn't the ADL complain?
Yes, the ADL does complain and has complained about that.
Yeah.
Look, I ask you a very general question, which is something which occurred to me. We'll go off script a bit.
All of this was scripted, by the way. We should say
put away the teleprompter.
Right. I mean, we are the Kamala Harrises of podcasting. It's yeah.
The question is this: do you ever feel alienated from the world? So, two quick things. One thing is, I was encountering some people who were much younger than me and looking at their political views and talking to them, and I realized they just came from a very different space than I do about a whole lot of things. About that they think communism is good. They think they have different views about all sorts of things. I said, okay, well, that's fine. But then I look at something like I saw a list of the top podcasts in America.
Oh yeah.
And it is.
Were we on it? Were we on it? Where were we? 2, 3?
I think when they cut it off, it was right there, the non-zero podcast. But it was Joe Rogan, of course.
Yeah.
Makes me into Joe Rogan. The Tucker Carlson show, which to me, from what I've heard about it, seems absolutely deranged. And now the Hakta girl.
Who's that? That reminds me, I have more to say later about, I'm going to write this down. We talked last week about Tucker Carlson and this guy, Daryl Cooper. I listened to Daryl Cooper's explanation for what he was trying to say about Churchill and Hitler and everything. I can shed more light. But I digress. Go ahead.
I'm not going to explain to you the Hakta girl. You just go Google it.
I think I get the idea from the name, but
the point is that I feel the world has gone fucking mad.
Yeah. No,
I have my friends, I have people I talk to, I have people I read, and I have a community which I feel, reasonable people, we're disagreeing and everything like that. But I feel we're just this thing. And then the broader part of America, half of Americans are going to vote for Trump. And I kind of get. I mean, when I think about, again, you're speaking to someone who has 3 siblings who voted for Trump. So prepare yourself for these deep insights. But when I think about a lot of things, the level of information the average voter has, right? And just how easy it is to put yourself in, your echo chamber where you view your candidate in a particular way and don't hear these things about them. And, if you want to put yourself in that camp and look at Kamala or Joe Biden and focus on the stuff that, puts them in a negative light, it's not, that doesn't shock me. It does, but I am alarmed by, for example, like Joe Rogan, 90% of the stuff is fine, but then he'll have like Eric Weinstein has gotten only crazier. Like, I think just this week he was doing this shtick about, what was he? It was, Kamala Harris's line, unburdened by the past.
He
Yeah.
was doing some kind of like literary theory analysis where this is secretly not just Marxist, but like totalitarian Pol Pot level shit. I mean, he's fucking crazy.
I saw the clip. He's asked about it. Long pause. Says, I'm not sure I'm able to talk about this right now.
Yeah.
Because this is big, big news. And apparently there was a phrase like this in the Communist Manifesto. Not the same phrase, but it was like it, you know? And this is very, very concerning. And this, could get him in some trouble with the deep state.
But again, either no capacity to assess evidence or deep cynicism. And I suspect with him, it's more the latter. His brother's increasingly crazy. Brett Weinstein. Folks, Google my debate with Brett Weinstein on his podcast. I wasn't in top form, but I think he's wrong and I'm right.
This seems like this seems like a slur against, they're not twins, are they?
No.
A slur against brothers, but I have not gotten into my head who's who. I just say, oh, the Weinsteins. And I don't have two separate categories in my head. I just say it's a Weinstein. I separate them from Harvey. That I separate.
Yeah, those are definitely differences. Speaking of which, look, Paul, we're at the point where we're gonna go into overtime.
Oh, we have so much more to talk about.
I know, including as long as you mention Harvey. Not that this is much of a connection, but sex scandals. Olivia Nuzzi, and how do you pronounce that last name? Nuzzi?
I don't know. Nuzzi.
Nuzzi is good. She's a journalist. Would be good. News, news. And RFK Jr., the perennially fascinating person. And I do want to get into the Daryl Cooper thing.
I'd like to hear Daryl Cooper. Amy Wax has just been, I know you have strong feelings.
The inimitable.
Amy Wax has gotten a serious, a UPenn law professor who has long gotten in trouble for her heterodox views, to put it in a most mild sense, has finally been severely sanctioned by her university. The people who hated her wanted her to get fired or lose her tenure. That did not happen, but she's been seriously sanctioned, put on leave at half pay for a year, other various punishments and humiliations. And and we may be on different sides of this. My views are not. I think in some ways she's done things that should be.
Don't leave it in the locker room, as Mickey used to say.
Fair enough.
But
man, we're gonna fight.
We're in the tease. We're in the tease. So this is what we call the tease section of the podcast.
And then there's babies.
Oh yeah. Is it bad if you're a childless cat lady? Is that the question?
There's been a discussion, of course, of whether Harris's lack of biological children renders her unfit to be president. Serious
people have asserted as much. And we will discuss that. I want to respond to commenters who complained about my position on the Elon Musk Brazil thing and explain to them how wrong they are.
You could talk about that.
It's a good example of a question I'll answer. So, folks, if you become we call them members, non-zero members, you may call them cynically and crassly paid subscribers to your newsletter. I don't know, to the Small Potatoes newsletter.
We call them spuds.
Oh, man, you win. Shit, we got to come up with a better name. We will. And it won't be zero heads. We'll do better.
Zero.
But if you become either one of those things, go to either newsletter, become what some people call a paid subscriber. You'll have access to the overtime segment. And I don't know. I don't think there's anything to say but to transition to thank everyone who's stuck with us this long, and to thank 10% more deeply the ones who are sticking around for the rest. Maybe just 10%.
Yeah.
All right. So thanks. And here we go into overtime.